to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mwangu Shampagi, and with me in studio tonight, I have a team of colleague journalists to discuss for the next 1.5 hours. Yusuf Serunkuma. Yusuf is a columnist with The Observer and is an academic. Yusuf, very nice to have you once again here.
Nice to be here. Thank you so much.
And here we have Tom Malaba. Tom Malaba is a senior crime reporter working with Daily Monitor. Very nice to have you, Tom.
Nice having you too.
And Dictor Simwe, who's a senior writer with the East African newspaper. We'll begin our discussion with Makerere University, which has been at the center of a major strike. The debate is not about the strike by students who are protesting the beginning of the implementation of a phased 15% increment on tuition, but rather the reaction of the security forces. By yesterday, the bigger question that was being asked was, why has all this been left to the police and the military? The operation was joint between the military and the police that raided students' hostels and halls of residence, beating up of students, ransacking their residences, and a number have been admitted apparently, but also Makerere looks like a garrison of some sorts. So you drive in and you find all the trucks. Though, to the management of Makerere University, life is still normal, and they want things to move on as normal. And the debate has shifted, especially from political commentators saying, what you're missing is that this is not just a mere demonstration against tuition, but there is a lot more to it than you're able to see. That dictates the response. I've also seen references to similar incidents dating back many years ago. Some people have referred back to 43 years ago. Yeah. Yes, about 43 years ago.
No,
what happened?
No.
Yes?
I think it was before even the colonialists.
No. I think the major one they have referred to is the one of President Idi Amin.
Yeah, but there is one by Obote and one by the colonialists.
Yes. So people have been looking back so many years back to draw parallels between the reaction of the security agencies, particularly the military, and what has been seen before. Let's start with exactly that. I need someone to help me understand what exactly is the crisis, because this tuition increment was announced some time back, and the University Council and the Senate agreed that it will be introduced to incoming students, not continuing students, and that the timetable for its introduction was clear right from the beginning. Why is it, Yusuf, you spent a lot more time at Makerere than a lot of us, both as a student and as an academic. What is dictating this course of events, especially over the tuition?
For now, it remains difficult to understand. But I've been trying to find the spark for this present spate of riots, and I'm still struggling to understand it. But I think there are three issues that are really contending the condition as it is of now. The first is that I want to agree with whoever also said that students have been dishonest on this one, because the increment affects students who joined 12 weeks ago. So the students who are already on the program are not affected, and even those who joined knew that we're joining under a different regime of school of tuition. So to complain in the 12th week, I think is unfair on the part of the students. But that notwithstanding, and I think that's an entirely different matter. We cannot debate now and exhaust the claim that the school fees paid by Makerere University is very small compared to the region. I think that's bonkers. The university must have an internal conversation about their school dues, which they've had. Manga has suggested the first two visitation committees, the Omaswa report and the Rendere committee, all of them recommended fees increment. All right, and then there was 90% increment or 72% increment, which would be like really difficult to implement. So the negotiation ended with 15% after over a period of 5 years.
Yes.
All right, so that's a legitimate conversation that was held and was completed. And students waking up now and demonstrating, I think that's unfair on their part. But the other, which I think is now the big thing we're debating, is the response by those in charge, both the university and the state establishment. And that's a big one for now that we're going to debate it for a very long time, because it pales. Students are free to wake up at one time and demonstrate anything. In fact, the idea of a university is that it is run by its activism. Students have the right, as part of their training, because of the access to the new reading material, the thing that affect them in their daily lives as students, also on the national scale, they have every single right to stand up and demonstrate, because the university is in part their training ground. You know, if you go back historically, the colonial government had problems, had refused to establish universities in sub-Saharan Africa because of their lessons they had learned from India. They were afraid of training the next crop of activists and anti-colonial intelligentsia. That was the argument against establishing universities. So if you can't train and if you can't encourage activism by the university, I think that is some sort of self-destruction of the university. Now, what we saw happen as response from the state, that is unforgivable. That is way beyond our imagination. But also maybe we'll be shocked that government is reacting this way, because if you live under an autocracy, which was lesbian democracy and autocracy, you expect stuff like that to happen. So
why then would you be shocked?
Well, the shock is that we have this sort of facade of democracy that we tend to think that maybe government cannot do this, right? But you saw police take a back seat and then military men take over and going to students' dormitories and beating up students, breaking into doors, breaking up destroying their equipment. I mean, things like plates and TVs and laptops being taken. You know, the story of James Sebide, the PWD student, who is the Minister of Disabilities in Lumumba, who was simply recording the incidents that were unfolding. They went to his room, broke into his room, beat him up. Now he's finding comfort, he's recuperating at his parents' home. But he's in so much pain. I've seen the pictures, I've been talking to him, I've seen the pictures. He's all bandaged up. You know, that was an unexpected to happen to a university when you still claim to be a democracy of sorts. So that removes any of the claims we've made before, that we still have a democracy in this country.
Tom, let me come to you. There was a meeting yesterday to discuss exactly this response. But the concern out of yesterday's meeting, from what I've been able to pick, was the PR disaster that it's become. And they were trying yesterday to locate responsibility, who should be speaking. They're saying, you university, you invited us into this mess. Why are you not speaking out and explaining yourselves? And the university is saying, but the police is saying, but you know, we're not at the front of this. It's the military that was at the front of this, and the military. But trying to manage that process internally by explaining what happened and how it happened. You saw those broken doors?
Yes, I did.
Raids into the night, raids in the night into halls of residence, the beating up of students. This girl who's become the face of this demonstration, Siperia Sasrabo, she's hospitalized, in bad condition. There are many others who are hospitalized. Why would the security agencies respond like they have responded to this particular demonstration?
Charles, I want to take the shoes of the soldiers. When we are talking about issues that affect our society, we tend to forget the soldiers. Can you imagine that these are also people who are disgruntled in a way? Just the other day, the president announced that the soldiers were going to be paid. They were going to receive a salary increment. The president never gave it to them, but he gave it to the doctors. He gave it to the judges. Taking their shoes and what they did, they're kind of trying to vent out their frustration on the students. That is why they go out and break the doors. Get in, your parents have received a salary increment. The moment you let out soldiers on the students in such an environment, you cannot limit what they are going to do.
But Tom, let me cut in there. My concern is, progressively, we have allowed this narrative to grow. But actually, it seems it comes from a certain command decision. These soldiers are deployed, they are given the tools with which to act, and they are given instructions on what to do. You can trace this back to 2007, when we first saw Kiboko Squad arrive on the street here. We saw them walk out of CPS, the Central Police Station. You cannot say these guys are acting on their own when you armed them with the sticks to use to beat people. The moment you give them those sticks, when they beat up James Akena, the journalist, the other day, they had come armed with a tool to use in a particular way. So even in Makerere, it cannot just be frustration. It must be some level of command. Yes. Some strategy that people sat somewhere and said, to respond to these students, we must teach them a lesson, and this is the lesson we're going to teach them.
Charles, you must know that we are living in times where the state is very scared or people pouring onto the street. So any kind of stability or any kind of protest that is likely to spill onto the street and maybe spur a kind of situation that can lead to a government's fall is kind of is feared. So whatever is being done, it has to be used, people have to use a lot of force. That is why when they were launching the police plan, you saw Elwelu coming on the front line. Now, where Elwelu is, you don't expect that you are going to have that much peace. Within no time, you realize that Makerere had died down. It's not that I'm coming out in support, but I'm saying that these soldiers who are out there, who are coming onto the street, they're also passing a message that you people, the other day, you shortchanged us on our salaries. We need better. So the best way is for them to vent out their anger onto these students, and then the state can kind of listen.
Thank you. Victor, let me come to you. Tom raises a very interesting thing. And from us as journalists, I'm looking for the strategy, the decision to call in the police, the decision to call in when the stages with which the demonstration deteriorates from students carrying placards and protesting against the new school fee structure, to the management sitting and saying, we can't handle this on our own, so we need the help of security agencies, the police, and then the police saying, no, we can't handle this on our own, we need the help of the military. That follows a very clear thinking. And the question I want to put to you, he raises the question of bringing in Elwelu. Elwelu is notorious for his command of what happened in Kasese, 2016. Before Elwelu,
he kills children and women. And
before Elwelu, we had Sam Omala, who was the poster of demonstrations and how to break them down. Those are not coincidences.
Yeah, but you see, you talk about Sam Omala, and Sam Omala broke demonstrations, but I don't think many people, when he was in charge, I don't think many people died when he was in charge. So I think those two are different in their operation. But I want to first of all go back to what Tom has said about the army and police supposedly doing what they are doing as a form of protest to the government. The government wants this, or at least I should say the state. The state wants that to happen. You cannot tell me, Charles, that a group of girls holds placards, and you look at them and you're like, these are very, and there were very few by the way, you're like, these are very dangerous. We would like to bring in an army that has fought in some of the worst places on earth, whether you're talking about Somalia or Central African Republic or DRC, where genocides have happened, where all sorts of things have, and you're like, this group of girls, I'd rather they are handled by that kind of people. It's not surprising then that someone breaks into, it's not surprising then that someone breaks into rooms and then hurts students, whether it's through beating. It's also possible that it was sexual, because I worry about a soldier like that entering a girl's room and like just walking away like that. And it's not true that it's the police or the army protesting. I also there is something that Yusuf raised about tuition.
You're looking at the images there of the demonstrations and the students walking with.
But that was a day later.
Oh, yes.
That was
the initial one wasn't that.
The initial one wasn't like that. So I wanted to talk about at Makerere. One of the reports, the most recent one of Rendale, it also pointed out that on average, Makerere University admits 33,000 students, about 12,000 graduate. Yes, it's possible that it's because people fail, but there is also a high possibility that tuition or lack of money is a contributing factor. Not long ago, a student from Makerere University who with a metal suitcase was trending and being taken care of. You can't say that he's just one of them. There have to be many others. Yeah. So sometimes, and this argument that because the continuing students are not being affected, that they should therefore ignore what's happening. That's not true. But
the discussion on social media, especially, and commentators, especially those who are supporting the government and the reaction are saying, if students are able to pay this kind of money at other private universities, they'll give examples of Uganda Christian University Mukono, they'll give examples of Nkozi, they'll give other many examples and say, you go in knowing this is what to expect, like Yusuf was saying. The fee structure is this. Then you go in.
Yeah, but
why?
but
Someone
Charles,
has asked, I think it was Andrew who was asking, why this feeling of entitlement?
No, but you see, on this continent, we've seen in South Africa where students, because you cannot say, let's just have the rich go to school, which is what Makerere is attempting right now. You're saying, let's have the rich go to school. You cannot, there is me, my siblings, most of my siblings, when they went to university, it was through private sponsorship. Every semester, my dad had to borrow money, and like I can't say he's like he's at the bottom. He's not. He's in the middle. You would say he's in the middle, but he always had to go somewhere to borrow money, and with my mom chipping in for my siblings to be able to pay their tuition. So you can't have a public university where the only people who can pay tuition are of those parents who have paid in Kabuja, who have paid in Chitende, who have paid in the most expensive schools in this country, because that's just not tenable. If you ask an average Ugandan to raise over $1 million shillings, which is guaranteed, because at Makerere, if you include library fees, registration fees, examination fees, and all those, and
The functional fees and
yeah,
the tuition.
if you add tuition, every parent pays at least $1 million shillings unless they are doing a diploma, and you cannot tell me that that's little money in this economy of ours. Because you see, if you're calculating how much people can afford, you also have to, if you're saying pay this much at university, you also have to consider who you're targeting, because Makerere University is a public university. Government puts money in that university. You cannot then say, let's pay the same as
the private universities.
As the private university, where everything is taken care of by
We're discussing two things here, and you raise a very important point. I think one of Makerere's biggest problems is that government wants it to run as a public institution over which it has a lot of leverage, but also at the same time driven by market forces. And that's, like Victor says, I think is not tenable in the circumstances. I have been at Makerere, and I have seen students towards either coursework week or exams month, when you begin exams, and they're extremely desperate to find money.
Yes.
Now, if you're paying for yourself, most of them are paying for themselves anyway, or parents are paying for them. If you're paying for yourself, it is your hustle to run around, borrow money, do what? No one else will know what you're going through. But if it's a young student who doesn't have another place to get their money apart from the parents, and the parents are saying, we don't have money, and they're staring at losing a semester, they're staring at losing a year, and they don't know if they'll be able to pick up. Because of course there are other expenses, hostel fees. You're paying for yourself, it means you're accommodating yourself. You're feeding yourself.
Yeah.
You're buying photocopy material because the library cannot provide you everything that you want. And this discussion is not happening anywhere. Under Professor Nawangwe, it seems the decision has been made. This is an institution, is an academic institution. Don't bring your gauge of demonstration. Is that sustainable, Yusuf?
So let's start from the very beginning. The paradox you raised between public and private, that's a 1980s paradox when we had neoliberal reforms happening across the African continent. University education was termed as a luxury, that it's only for those who could afford it. And I would disagree with Dicta slightly that whoever is at university is actually a member of the rich. Whichever ways you find the money, after 1980, when structural adjustment was introduced in the 1980s, all universities became places where you have to pay for. Before, the stories we hear from those who went to university before the 1980s, they had, it was like paradise, right? Everything was paid for. Books, hostels, tuition, lunch, that they even had the ability to build houses from the monies they were getting as part of their stipends at university. That was before structural adjustment. So structural adjustments changed this entire thing. Neoliberalism let the markets operate, change the entire game. So universities have to be places where people pay. That's standard. Now, the paradox has remained for Makerere. Now, the big one is the problem of funding. Makerere is underfunded. And I can tell you, if you speak to all the technocrats of Makerere, they tell you that even if Makerere was to increase the tuition by 90%, where a course like medicine, which is going like 1.5 million, will be going at, say, maybe 2.5 will be costing 20 million a semester, Makerere cannot sustain itself on those only internal generation.
Why?
It can't. Because that would be, first, it's difficult for you to charge a course 20 million Uganda shillings, right? It's difficult to do that. But so secondly, still the money will be less because the budget for Makerere University is 330 billion, 320 billion a year. And that's a budget which has been cut. But Makerere generates 90 billion. That is plus the 70% that they get from government. All right? So the budget is already below. The budget is a deficit budget, but also what they're generating is small. So even if you had all these courses bring these monies, they will still be operating below the expected funds which they should have. So they debate over whether funds are the solution. Funds have to come from elsewhere, across. Makerere has to be generating funds through different ventures. Makerere has to get, there should be money coming from government, which is larger than the 70% they're giving. So the problem, you have government-sponsored students, which is like 77,500 students every year. Because every year,
because you're entering 2,000 per year.
In a period of 3 years, you'll have 6,000. So plus those courses that go to for 4 to 5 years, you'll have 7,500. Now, the money coming from Makerere University, for those students, each one of them gets 4,000 Uganda shillings every semester. That is way below. So in the end, Makerere is struggling to raise funds. It's very small for every semester. So Makerere is struggling, but they also give a block figure. That's when you break it down. So they just give a block figure every year, plus the wage bill, which is 70%. When you look at that figure, the private students are in a way trying to cover up for the deficit. And every time the university negotiates with the government to raise the money, the government says you have to increase the tuition, right? Because the government claims to be stuck on funds, and then the university says we have a deficit budget, so we need to find ways of raising money. And the problem which you could hold with the administration of Makerere is their obsession with generating funds through raising tuition.
Yes.
When they know that even if you are to be raised by 100%, it will still remain underfunded. The avenues, other avenues from which they can raise funds have been completely forgotten. They started to think of Mark Holdings. It's inundated by trouble after trouble, scandal after scandal, turning the assets of the investor into
the money generating.
Which they can generate funds is a big problem. But that's the part of the debate when you look at the condition.
Go to alumni and get some money.
Yeah, so they fail to find the creative ways of generating funds. You know, but they're so obsessive with raising tuition as a ways of generating funds, which is a big problem. But the debate now, which we're focusing on, and I think Tom Alaba raised it, is why do we have the military respond the way it did? That's a big question of our time. And I should say, if you look at students' experiences elsewhere, in Ethiopia in 1960, 1974, the Emperor Haile Selassie was kicked out of office by students' protests. In 1976, you forget, the Makerere University student raised a very, very big storm in this country against the government of President Amin. So we have a history of protests which start as campaigns against good education or bad education, turning big things and threatening the status quo. In this country, the only thing that threatens Museveni's government is protests. Now, Museveni is determined, however small a protest is going to happen anywhere in this country, it will be dealt with decisively. And I can tell you, we are yet to see more. You'll see if the market vendors are rioting in this town. Even if they're rioting over, say, a rise in their rent, the response is the same as it was in Makerere. So the threat to Makerere students is doing a thing that is part of the education.
But you see the difference? Yes, I hear you, and we've witnessed this over a long period of time. The question is, where do you draw the line? What's the difference between 1976 and 2019?
I wanted to answer
because
that.
You need to, yes.
In the sense that in 1996, the
1976.
Makerere, 76, sorry, the administration was against that attack. Today, we have an administration that is pro that attack. Exactly. And let me tell you that one of the reasons the army was able to go into that university the way they did was because we now have a vice chancellor who has taken on a model. First, he started with sacking, I think, of close to 50 lecturers. he has taken on a model. I think it's sort of the same as when you are at MOOBs. You go in, stifle everyone who might create dissent against you, so that either you can remove the term limits against the Vice Chancellor in Makerere, or once your terms are over, you're given a job elsewhere. That right now is the problem of Makerere, because if it wasn't that, and I hear what you're saying about protests being crushed the way they do, but you cannot be at a university, you cannot claim to be a professor, someone who is supposed to believe in ideas. You look at girls protesting, holding placards, and you're like, I'm crushing them with an army. When you can actually invite these girls, these students, have a conversation, because that's what being at a university is about. Have a conversation, convince them, and even if you have
from what I have heard, nothing has been left to chance at that institution. Every possible, including stalking suspected trouble causers,
yes,
and trailing them with vehicles and getting them arrested quietly, including bribing students who are who can be convinced to turn the other side, and including the brutal crash.
Yeah, and that just shows you that that place has stopped being a university, it's something else. And by the way, it's showing you have donors who have been funding research, for example, starting to walk away. And you can expect that after this, more donors, whether it's MasterCard, which, for example, is into gender equality, has seen people being molested in their hostels, you can be sure that more people will walk away. And that is just not an environment that you can call a university.
Can Makerere think outside the box? We need to take a break, I'm afraid. But we can pick this up and discuss it for the next few minutes after the break. Can Makerere turn and look elsewhere and generate actual money, like other universities internationally do? What can it do? And then we need to examine a little bit more of this, the brutal response from the military. Because if you cannot allow your academic staff to demonstrate, you slap them with administrative sanctions to make sure they shut up.
Yeah.
You cannot allow students to express themselves. Then where's that space for free expression? Let's take a break. We'll be picking this up in a moment. You're still watching the Fourth Estate, and we're discussing the demonstration against tuition increment at Makerere University, and more importantly, the reaction of the military to break into students' hostels, beat up students. And one of the things that we haven't discussed in greater detail is the actual detail, because whereas government will attack and condemn the media for portraying an image they don't want to be portrayed, they're actually also using the media. If you see on Twitter and on Facebook, the defenders are really out to defend what has been happening in Makerere. And the actual story gets lost in that. The story of this girl, Superior Sasravo, is not yet told. No. I don't know if it will be told. But I think I get worried of the worst we are likely to hear on her treatment. And on the rest of the reaction. You've been speaking to this other student with disability, James, yes.
James Savide is a year 3 student of Industry of Fine Art, and he was beaten inside his room, which was broken into by security forces, and his crime was recording proceedings that were happening on the floor below.
That's a high crime from what we have experienced lately.
That's a crime. But you asked a question that I wanted to speak about. The question about the difference between Idi Amin and these events happening under Idi Amin and happening under Museveni at the same time in almost similar fashion. It reminded me about the German theorist Friedrich Hegel, who said historical events tend to happen twice. And when Marx was responding to that, he said the first time as tragedy and the second time as farce. The first time the events shock us, but the second time we tend to laugh at them, or they don't shock us as much. Now, there's another theorist called Herbert Marcuse who added that the second happening of these events may come in the form of first, but it's more threatening than the first. The horror is big. This country must be horrified because we see a repetition of things that we thought were left in the past. And we are likely to see continuity. And let me give you a brief thing that happened not too long ago. When we had a trade union protest early this year, and and I want to agree with Dicta here when she said that the problem now is that we have professors at Makerere who are actually in bed with government making madly love. I mean, the conflicted professor at Maiza, Mahmoud Mamdani, wrote a piece in the two major dailies in this country accusing fellow trade unionists, colleagues, as regime change intellectuals. The ambition was to mobilize the government of President Museveni to come into Makerere and deal with the so-called regime change intellectuals who had taken over Makerere. Now, you may need to know that Mahmoud Mamdani and Professor Nawangwe are close friends. And in this fight in this process of showing Mr. Museveni that the real threat to your presidency is at the university is huge in this too. So they're playing this game. So when you call professors as regime change intellectuals, by extension, everywhere at the university who might want to disagree with the status quo at Makerere is a regime change intellectual. So the president will use every single opportunity to come into the university and deal with the so-called regime change intellectuals and regime change students, if you can say it by extension.
Is this the discussion that's actually happening? Is this the thinking, Tom?
To me, I like to look at this from still the soldiers and the students' point of view. You get a girl to lead a strike. She's going out there half-heartedly, and she's not going to create much change. These soldiers go out into the room. Let's just look at that act. You go out into the room. These guys have barricaded themselves in their rooms. That means they're not a threat. The police in the past used to condone off. The moment they would get students back into the university, they would withdraw and take the perimeter to keep the students. But these soldiers go out and they're beating everybody out. It is as if they're herding these people onto the streets. You guys, why don't you go out and topple this regime? You get. This is the kind of situation where the soldiers are basically passing a message. You guys, we are also tired. But you are not doing, stop hiding, you are not doing enough now. By beating the students, by breaking into, every parent is concerned.
Look at that student beaten up. That's James.
Yeah. Everybody is concerned. They're basically saying, get out there and get this regime out. You are the students. For us, once we come in, it will be a mutiny. They're basically sending a message because on their part, they're also overstretched.
Dicta, I can see you smiling about that.
Well, for me, I think here's why Ugandans should be worried. We have a university vice-chancellor who is interested in turning the university into, I don't want to call it a secondary school because even secondary schools should know better. You cannot have students who are not allowed to speak up. This is their final step in education for those who might not do a master's degree or whatever. And you're telling
even if they did
them,
this is a very definitive stage in education.
So you're telling them, if you're out there and your boss tells you jump, you jump. We are in a world where you need innovation. What you're training are house girls and shamba boys to go to the Arab world and work, because these people who cannot be allowed to think and debate cannot then be allowed to think, innovate outside once they are done with
But it's been
school.
arguing, Nawangwe has argued, and those who support him, that by going out and demonstrating, the demonstrations that often turn into riots, you're actually not engaging in intellectual thinking.
That's not true, Charles.
Yes.
Okay, so then I can answer that very easily, and that's why I was smiling at Tom. I was in Mary Stuart, so I'm quite familiar with riots. This is what happens normally at Makerere University. Students come out, whether it's a political rally, whether it's over a political rally, they have gathered in a square somewhere, or it's actually a protest. They come out, then the police or the security forces in this case come out and start, like they open the violence on them, and then that's when the violence starts. And the reason I was smiling, I know for a fact that like 10 years ago, the police was still doing what they did with, okay, so here it's worse than it has been, because usually what they do is get tear gas canisters, lob them into people's rooms, and Lumumba was built like that. There is that space where you can lob tear gas canisters into people's rooms, and then people would run out. So it's sort of been a progressive thing. So from lobbing tear gas canisters into rooms so that students can be smoked out, to what we have now, where they just break into the rooms to actually beat and torture and molest students. So that has been the progressive thing. So, but anyways, here's the thing, that you can allow this. So let's assume that what Nawangwe and his supporters are saying is true. Show us an attempt by the university to actually call these people before you bring in the, because you have a dean of students. What's the use of a dean of students at that university these days? If it's not to talk to students, if it's not to interact with students, show us evidence that first you invited these students to come and discuss. And this argument that I've heard of, you are a continuing student, you're not going to pay any more money, that doesn't make sense. If I am a first child, so me, I'm a first child. I have a sister coming up. I'm at that university. I know what my parent is going through to get tuition for me. I know people are coming up behind me. That the fact that tuition has been increased for my follower means my income reduces.
But Dictor, don't you appreciate also that the fact that, yes, that might be the fact. You're a student at the university. You're able to appreciate basic economic principles and say the cost of living has gone up, the university needs more money.
Yeah, but
so yes, it might be painful to raise that money, but there's justification that money needs to be raised.
But Charles, that's not even true. If the argument is on inflation, the inflation rate has not gone up by 15%. If you're arguing cost of living, because then the basis of cost of living would be inflation rate. But then again, even if the inflation rate had gone up 15%, there are things you can do within the university, whether like we were saying, figure out ways to raise money that don't go into parents' pockets, because we know this is a poor country. And by the way, the other thing I wanted to talk about is that this university under Nawangwe is consistently even losing space because it used to be ranked number 5 in university rankings. Now it's between 10, it keeps falling even further. Last year it was, I think, 11th or something. That was the first time for as long as I can remember when it failed.
Though it was at Makerere the other day, and one of the deputy vice chancellor in charge of academics was telling us that university 64% of the teaching staff are PhD level, and that doesn't happen across most of these universities on the continent.
That's because the World Bank, all these European governments are giving money, and that's they are paying for these people to go and study in their university. And that also goes to the argument that the university has costs. This place is being subsidized by different grants.
Your number is, I think, we're now Makerere number 16. I think about number 16. Though it has a fantastic medical school that has been ranking well.
Just, but truth,
yes,
there was a meeting that happened in the university and the students' leadership over a couple of other things, including the ways in which the leadership is elected. And you need to know that we're also entering into an election period, so stuff like this is likely to happen. But
not for a third-year student.
But I want to agree. I want to agree with Dictor that in the era of fees must fall, it doesn't make sense that a university somewhere in this world is looking for ways of upping its university, because right now we're living in the era of fees must fall, and I want to agree with everybody who believes that education is a human right. The right to education is a human right. If we are happy about UPE, we're studying for free. we should be surprised that students at the university are demanding for lesser fees to have their education. Even the university that have been quoted in the region to say they're paying far higher than the university. they're also not subsisting on the monies that they're raising. So in this era, you can't claim the students who are protesting fees hikes are really way off track. But what I want to agree with the university to a point, right, is the question that you've been studying for the last 12 weeks. You've been at the university for the last 12 weeks. The school fees actually affect you deeply. All right? Why haven't you woken up and said we need to protest? Now, that argument can only be believed to a point, but when you stretch it, they are in the 12th week.
Yes.
Very soon they're entering exams, right? And because if you don't have an exam permit, which means you've paid 100%, you can't be allowed to see the exam. So there is no better moment than now to have a movement against school fees because we're entering an exam period.
No, but you see that's only very logical because the pressure is not upped until you reach exam time.
Yeah, true.
Yes.
You've been allowed, I would agree with the university, you've been allowed to attend lectures up to that point.
Yeah.
Now, the definitive moment is when you're going to sit exams.
Exactly, yeah.
If you can't sit exams, then the other investment is put to waste.
Yeah.
And therefore, the timing is understandable. But the question is, and I want to put this to Tom, these protests at Makerere started in 1992 when 2 students were killed, were gunned down.
The Toms.
The Toms, yes. When boom ended, and what you talked about, the structured adjustment programs and neoliberalism, as you put it. Between 1992 and today, you've had running battles at Makerere that are centered primarily on tuition or remuneration for lecturers and other non-teaching staff. Why hasn't this government been able to sit down
Or the university
or the university itself over the last 30 years and say, this is the problem we need to deal with? No, not 30, 25 or 20 so years. Why?
Almost 30.
Well, almost 30 years. Why hasn't there been a discussion that says, wait a minute, we know where this started from, we know where we're heading, you're a university for goodness sake, you're projecting what things will look like, because you're training economists who are able to project ahead the next 20, 50, 100 years. Why hasn't this been arrested? Why do you have these running battles? Because you have them now, you'll have them again next year. You have the only thing that has changed is the intensity, the brutality with which you respond to those demonstrations.
Charles, I want to think that there is somewhere we, as a society, we went wrong. Those people who went to university, when the university was free, everything was free, kind of forgot where they came from. They kind of forgot that they came from humble families, and therefore there are still humble families out there. If we set out to, there are many private universities around. Those who can afford can go there, so that Makerere can still remain a university for those for the disadvantaged, but who are capable intellectually, so that they can be in position to study and get to where a person, an ordinary person who can afford, can get. Because if you look at all the government ministers, they went there. It was free, but today, now looking back, they are saying they are undoing the same thing. They're basically disadvantaging the ordinary person.
They are cutting the ladder they use to climb.
No, I'm actually shocked. You raised something interesting. I'm actually shocked that people arrive on the other side just a short while ago and forget completely where they came from, and just like you're saying, because if you see the arguments, I was sharing some banter with a friend who said these students shouldn't feel entitled to cheap education. I'm saying, did you actually pay your own tuition when you're at Makerere, or you belong to that small group? The 2,000 who enter annually and the 7,500 that Yusuf was talking about are not bothered by this demonstration, because their hand is being held by the government. The problem is getting privately sponsored students to carry the burden, including of those, because government doesn't pay on time for its contribution.
Doesn't pay enough.
It doesn't pay enough. And when Makerere is a public university that the government wants to claim control over, they do not want to meet its budget. And they can't understand why a child who has been struggling to pay their own way through from early on up to this stage is still saying, you're charging me too much. I can't afford this.
Charles, you know, the time I was at university, I had a friend who was a Carnegie was sponsoring her. Then they looked at her supposed status and cut her off. They said she was too rich. She had to get married to be able to pay her tuition. That's because then she married a guy, which guy then paid her tuition.
The remainder of her tuition?
Yes, the remainder of her tuition. These are some of the things that people have to go through to finish.
And some of the girls were talking about engaging in sex trade to just raise the money.
Yeah.
And you meet them and think they're evil because you don't understand where they're coming from, what's forcing them to do this. And
then we'll have our evangelicals preaching how girls should abstain from sex, blah 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 blah. But these are girls that are being put in a space. You're sent from home with just the transport you need to go to university and nothing else, and you have nothing to eat. So here are your two choices: you stay home. It's not like in places where you can say, I'll go to a restaurant and do work and come back and study. First of all, Makerere University doesn't. The education at Makerere University is not structured for a job and school. Or you get money from somewhere. And for girls, it ends up being prostitution.
Exactly.
And as we transition from this, let's disabuse us and our viewers and the people who are making the argument that if you can afford a private university that's paying more, it's actually creating a sieve of those who can access education and those who can't access it.
Yeah.
Majority of the poor people, majority of those who come from these humble backgrounds are actually being cheated, getting some sort of qualification that can't guarantee them a job in the hope of getting some education, some certification. So there are a lot of private institutions teaching very questionable courses, awarding very questionable certificates that are taking up and actually robbing these same poor people.
Because parents are selling land, they are selling all their assets to be able to take, because they see
to get some qualification somewhere.
And the government, and here's the alternative. There's been this argument that not everyone can go to university. But right now, the job market we have, there is almost no job, no single job where you can go and get what you would call a decent job without having a university degree. Let's restructure. Let's have, because in the meantime, the government is saying you don't need a degree, but they are requiring primary school teachers
to have a degree.
They are saying you don't need a degree, but they are requiring nurses, even the ones, the bedside nurses, to have a degree. So let's restructure. Let's have a structure where I can get a job, a certain type of job without
skills.
With skills without a degree. But right now what we have is everyone is required to have a degree. It might not make sense, for example, for teachers. I don't think it makes sense. Some of my teachers were grade 2, what used to be grade 2. And they were good teachers. There was nothing. It's not true that the others who are more educated were better than them. So, and if you need teachers to get refresher courses, have them get refresher courses. But you cannot say,
necessarily need a degree.
Yeah, you don't need a degree. You cannot say, let's have everyone get a degree for them to get a decent job, and then turn around and say, if you can't afford it, because basically you're saying the poor, you stay, we don't want you
stay
anymore.
Where you are.
Stay where you are. We shall just deal with the rich.
We shall move on with those who can afford. Okay, can we just switch, because there is also this discussion about shortage of funding for universal primary education. Since we're discussing education and poverty, and UPE was the panacea to those who couldn't afford an education, so the government shifted strategy from focusing on university education, which they call the luxury, for that benefits individuals, not community, to refocus funding to lower basic numeracy and literacy, which is at UPE and the USE levels now. Now, that is also having issues.
Charlie, but there's a quick point I do not run away from. I mean, the point you said something that government-sponsored students are not concerned about the demonstrations on Makerere. That is not necessarily true. I can tell you, government-sponsored students are really suffering quietly. I remember in my time, a government-sponsored student who collapsed in a queue at the bank waiting for her money because it delayed to come. And when she was picked up, she said, I am hungry. I've gone for 3 days without food because I've been waiting for the money from the government to cut my account. I know students at Makerere University, sponsored by their government, they struggle to find something to eat. The money given to them as living stipend is so minuscule that you can't live with. It's like about 350,000 for 3.5 months. It's very, very small.
But you can imagine.
They're going really hungry.
I don't disagree with you, Yusuf. The thing is, that is a student who has expectation, doesn't have to worry that it's going to come to exam time, and I will be I'll be told, get out of the exam. That is a student who expects that 350,000. Majority of the students going to Makerere University, like Dicta was telling you, have been told, we are looking for your fees, go to school. They are not going to chase you away today. And they pick transport, get their metal case, end up in a hostel in Chikoni, in Kasubi, in Katanga, around the university. Some places very difficult to live in.
True.
And whether they have a meal in the night or not, whether they can negotiate and get a card to eat off a student who is sponsored and does not want to eat hostel food.
But he's well off and does not want.
There's no food in the hostels anymore.
In the halls,
no, in the halls of residence. There's no food in the halls of residence. So they can't even get that card, which they used to buy, I think, about 60,000 shillings per semester. That is the reality. Why the nation is not sitting and discussing this for what it is what baffles me.
I just want to mention that nuance, that, that the government sponsors are not really having
they're a lot more comfortable than...
Well, slightly
more comfortable.
I go with
let's move on. So pick it up on UPE. Let me start with you.
Yes. So before I go into the UPE, there was a debate on the public-private complex. Either, because Makerere parades itself as a public university, which is meant to give a public service to its countrymen and women. Now, that's the danger, that if it masquerades as a public university and it can't afford giving a free service or an affordable service to its country people, then there's a problem. Either, and this has been said plenty of times, either Makerere offers to become a private university. Now, the problem is that the government of Uganda is not willing to take that because it will not be having Makerere the pride as a public institution. So that's the complex that really needs to be. Exactly.
Yes. Okay, let's move on to UPE. This is a report from the National Planning Authority, which is saying it's a review of 10 years of the performance of UPE, and it says put in more money or...
But it's some complex, right? You want to give a free service to your compatriots as a government, and you say you have UCE, but you leave all the money behind. Like, the report recommends, and it's interesting, it's a government report, recommends that the government has to be improved, the budget has been improved by 450%. Now that's bonkers, from 2 trillion to 11 trillion, all right? Now, if we're struggling in so many areas, you can't afford to have 11 trillion into the education system just at UPE level. The type of people coming out of UPE all the way into university, you can't have a conversation with them in English for maybe 10 minutes or 5. They're really doing so bad. A report a couple of, was it last year? Said that kids in P7, primary and P6, P5 cannot sit a P2 exam in person. That was a report still by the same government. All right? And
you know the government fought a lot against the reports that were being done by Twaweza. Twaweza was doing all these reports every year, churning out a report on literacy and numerous abilities of students in a higher class but of a much lower level. But we need to take a break. If I could just, we'll pick this up after the break, and then we'll discuss the police anti-crime strategy, which we touched on last week. We need to discuss it a little bit more in the next segment. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll spend a few minutes to discuss the UPE funding question, this report by the National Planning Authority, and then we'll jump into, we'll run to discuss a little bit more about the police anti-crime strategy, which was unveiled only last week. We discussed it a bit last week. We can take it and see where it's taking us. UPE and its funding issues. Dictor, what is the problem? When UPE started, it was a political program, 1997, announced in the heat of, just in the heat of elections, and then implemented immediately after. Not much thinking, but it's been revolutionary to many, in many respects, though people question the entry level, what figures for political purposes are captured at entry level, and how many you exit, and then the quality of education. But now, even the funding itself remains a major problem.
Not surprising. One of the things that Yusuf already talked about is how much you would need to make UPE work the way it should work. And it's 11.6 trillion. That's just UPE, not the whole education, not the whole Ministry of Education. And we already talked about the problems that university, USE, everyone faces. So that's an impossibility. It's difficult to see how government will resolve. If this was a functional government, I think they would consider they would consider sharing costs, with parents. So instead of parents who are rich taking their children to private schools, you convince parents to invest in the schools in their areas, so that they can use those same schools the same way we did. I know for a fact that when I went to school, for example, all the gifts they give students when the best 3 students are whatever were given by one parent from P1 to P7. He was a rich parent who, in addition to paying school fees, then added other things that he could afford. So he subsidized the poor parents in that school. The problem with the UPE we have now is that the rich parents take their kids to places where they pay 1 million, 2 million shillings and over, and then the poor students remain at UPE and are therefore exposed to that 10,000 shillings per year. The better choice would be for you to have both of those parents implement a sort of discriminative pricing. A parent who has more pays more, a parent who has, but that needs a functional government. And that's a problem that we can't resolve.
Tom.
Yes, Charles.
This conundrum called UPE, for political reasons, revolutionary was meaning in a political sense, because it's been touted every day. We had 2 million kids in school, in primary school. We introduced UPE, we jumped that number to 6.5 million, 7 million. Though you never see those numbers exiting. So a lot are being bled through the cracks of the system, and we're not accounting for them, which in a way links back to the crime we have been talking about, and what we'll be talking about as the police response strategy to this crime, which also links to the demonstration you're having at Makerere and other public universities. UPE, can government find the money for it?
I think government can find the money, but through, of course, funding from other donor agencies. That is, if government swallows the pill and said, I think we missed, let us get back to the drawing board and see what we can do right. There are schools that didn't need UPE. A school like Nakasero, a school like Buganda Road. The parents in those schools were really
students
were very able, but government moved in there. It spoiled the education in that school because of UPE, and now even the teachers who were there are no longer in that place. Yet, if government had left schools in those urban centers where really parents can afford something and take to those parents who really cannot afford, I think that would have gone a long way to make the program a bit sustainable. We are if we segmented the schools and say, okay, schools in urban centers, if parents can afford,
you grade schools,
yes,
wherever they are, and say this category of schools can stay out of UPE completely.
Yes.
This category of schools can get some UPE and some private.
Yes.
And then this category of schools is so poor, is so vulnerable that you need to.
You see, government is not cashing in on the advantage most UPE schools have. They have very good teachers. If you went to Nakasero, it's the school I know, they have very good teachers. That now parents actually, what they do, they go around the whole program and they deal with a particular teacher. Pay that particular teacher very well, and then they teach their children very well. I've seen a student who has been in position to, he started UPE at Bati Valley, and now he's a doctor. So you may think,
he's a UPE product. So you present that as a success of UPE.
Yes. Yet it is not a success of UPE. When you go behind, this parent had to engage teachers, different teachers, to teach these children. So I would think if government went out,
but why would a parent like that not take the child out into a purely private school and get the private education they wanted? Why keep them in a UPE school?
Do you know, in most private schools, some, let me not say most, in some of the private schools where we take our children, we are lied. They lie about the grades of your child, they lie about the capabilities of your child, but when you take to this UPE school, this teacher has been there for ages. He has been teaching that in that school. And the only problem is that they are stuck. They cannot go anywhere. That they stay there, so they continue earning like that. Because a school like, as I've said, Nakasero, all they wanted when the school program was when UPE was on, the headmaster used to say, give me a ream of paper. Yes, some parents could not afford the ream of paper, but some could bring, because they were seeing the shortage that was in place. The headmaster was saying, I need to give remedials to these children, but government cannot provide that. Now, if one parent could afford, there are a number who can afford and be in position to teach those students to get anywhere, to get somewhere. But yes, there's those schools that are in the rural, in villages where parents cannot afford. But still, I think that is where government was saying, okay, a child can come with their own food to school. But it's not only enough to have food at school.
Yes.
These people need scholastic materials. They need a teacher who is at least well motivated. If a teacher's roof is leaking, as it has been raining now, how do you expect that teacher to go in class and teach?
It's the fact that teachers in public schools earn a lot better than majority of the teachers in private schools.
Yes.
Because, Yusuf, I think when there's a conundrum around the government functions, when politics overtakes the motivation, then you lose what you need to do. Inspection of schools, caring about the administration, who takes care of these private schools, what kind of education they are offering, what kind of people they are hiring, what kind of infrastructure they have. Nobody seems to discuss that, because you think, well, if somebody can make money out of that, you look at the money that's coming out of it. If someone can, if we have options and it lessens the pressure on us as government to have children in school, then anybody can run the way they want. But can UPE be corrected where it is?
No, okay. And I'll tell you why. You gave us a brief history of the UPE in the time it was started, but I need to give you a longer history of the UPE gamble. So World Bank and IMF ruined rural economies in the 1990s. The 1990s remained a very pivotal time in our history as a country, well, not just in Uganda, but across Africa, but also because Uganda has a little bit of a uniqueness. So IMF introduced structure adjustment where the governments got out to the lives of the people, and a couple of years down the road, maybe 5 years, many rural economies were in ruin. Now, these rural economies, having been ruined, put so much pressure onto governments, especially because they're struggling for a major thing, school fees. Now, the struggle for school fees, in consultation with the technocrats at IMF and World Bank, they suggested, why not introduce free education so that the pressure is lessened? Because, you know, the gamble was that you don't have now the pressure of school fees, so you can have free education. So this is the context in which we have free education after ruining rural economies. Now, and as Dictor said, we now have a surge of private schools. And I think that's not true when you say that government schools pay better than private schools. I don't think
they
so.
do.
They do.
And let me explain. They are more consistent than the private schools. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a surge of private schools across the country, even in far-flung rural areas. We have a surge of private schools. So we have this complex now that we're a government which is meant to be giving things to people. We have to give public services to people. Among other things is education, but then also we are in a neoliberal economy where things must be privatized. Like everything should be run on its own terms. The forces of the market must determine how things play.
It's a contradiction.
In that context, a government cannot afford. It cannot afford to foot the bill of primary education. And as you've seen the figures, those figures can never be corrected. And because they can never be corrected, we're going to continue in this context. This is why you have figures manufactured. This is why you have newspapers like The Independent putting out very glamorous booklets about how UP is flourishing. But in truth, we're living in that period where after 1990s, many of these things were ruined. You can see, I mean, our transport system is heavily privatized. You know why? Because the thing that used to provide is privatized, but the contradiction in it is that it's in shambles, right? I mean, people can't easily access the different places they want to go to in this city because we are still caught up in that paradox. Are we really running a liberal economy, a neoliberal economy, or we can still give things for free? Now, every time governments want to claim we can give a free thing, the danger is that these free things cannot sustain funding them. And as long as that continues, as you saw the figure, that figure is way, way high for a government to sort it.
They serve a political purpose.
Exactly, but the political purpose, the real pain is felt by those who are supposed to be receiving good education.
Yes.
Because a decade down the road, when you look at the products of UPE, the successes are really manufactured. And you see like people like, you know, like I told you last time that we have a government of symbolism where we tend to portray things as if they're working. But in actual sense, they're not working. Figures, excuse me, figures are constantly manufactured to give glamorous portrayals of things which are actually ineffectual. And as long as, maybe if you can do this, which I think is not going to be possible, if you suggest that the government returns to privatization, that forget this thing called UPE, so that parents can actually fund their schools in schools.
But where will the parents get money from?
Thank you.
So that will mean like returning to support of rural economies so that they can benefit. But when rural economies were ruined and parents are now struggling to find money, for government to take the pressure off from this, because it was the work of the government to ruin these economies, they introduced to affect things such as UPE. And we'll be counting the cost 50 years from now. Won't have dullards all over our public service.
Yeah,
you can see from our parliament.
Yes.
But we have a vacuum in parliament. We have some of the best dullards.
That's an oxymoron.
You've seen them, right? I mean, you can imagine, like, you know, if you look at the names of people who are vying for political office, they're actually nameless. You have Full Figure, you have Khalifa Ganaga, you have Jose Camilo Kapi to become president, become mayor of Kampala. You have a guy like Bobby Wine. Well, he's exceptional, but still the name, we're known him for his namelessness. I mean, their names sound like the names of the criminal gangs that are terrorizing Kampala, right? The Dangers, Whispers. You know, it's something that this is the vacuum that these politicians have created and really now living in the pain.
There is a link, ladies and gentlemen, to what we've been discussing with the growing crime across the country. I think the discussion the other day was the children you put in UPE in 1997, 1998 are the ones that are at university level today, and therefore complaining that you gave us free education. You had those girls talking. You gave us free education in primary. Why don't you complete the journey at university? Why ruin us when we have arrived at the university? You're talking about members of parliament and other people in important positions who have gotten some questionable education, making decisions for the country. But you're also talking about kids who should have been removed from the street because of universalization of education, who shouldn't be terrorizing neighborhoods with machetes, or who shouldn't be available for hire to kill at 130,000 shillings. I think Tom did the story, 130,000 shillings. And you have police, some of it stuffed with people, the president called them bazukulu, who are enough to fill in these gaps. You have hired them as crime preventers, you have hired them as LDUs, you have hired them through mainstream security recruitment. because they have a certificate to present, some of them. And they are behaving the way they are behaving, but when you link, the crime is related. Can the police, with the strategies they have outlined, I want to start with you, Tom, deal with this insecurity, not just in Kampala, but across the country? Kidnaps that end up in murder, break-ins into homes, basic street theft, and basic security, really.
Charles, it is a tall order to completely wipe out crime out of our society. Yes, crime has taken root, but partly I would apportion blame to the police, because the police went so political and they forgot fighting crime, which is their cardinal role, and that has been as evidenced in the last 12 years. Let me start from the point of recruitment. Who are these people who are working as crime preventers? They were children of cadres, NRM cadres. As long as it was a child of an NRM cadre, they were brought together. They saw the system as it worked. And today, these are the people, because they know somebody in the police, they can always get back and work their way out. They can easily find their way out of the system of fighting crime. But the success of the whole plan is going to depend on the trust the public is going to have with the police. Let's just, for example, think that tomorrow the public is going to start coming out with information, because basically the police want the public to work with them, come and tell them what is happening within the society. But the police has done nothing to improve their trust, apart from the fact that okay, they have put counter numbers where the police can, a member of the community can call direct to the police station or police post that is nearest to them. There is nothing much, because once a person has been affected by crime, the first thing they want is that comfort. Are they free when they come into the police station? Are they free to speak out? Are they free to point out this person who is terrorizing this community? But as long as they fear and they are saying, okay, I might let the cat out of the bag, and this man...
And they come after me.
Yeah, and they come after me. And this has happened. We have seen this happening. You remember the case of the pastor in Chanamukaka who was killed with 10 members of his family? That pastor told the police that there was this guy who was killing him, who was killing people in the area. When police arrested and released the man, he went for the pastor and killed him. The police hunted for him and arrested him. Later, the man escaped. Today, the fellow is on the run. You get now. That is the kind of police we have in place. But can police at this moment prove that they are worth being trusted with the information they want? Because the people know the people who are causing them problems in the community, but they want the trust. Yesterday or the other day was with AIGP Kasinje. He said that they were going to put a police officer to man that telephone number at the desk 24/7. But who is this policeman?
But hold it a minute, Tom, there.
Yes.
You've invested, you built one of the most expensive police stations in Kampala, and you've put the control center for CCTV cameras. That thing in Natete, after the banning in 2009, I think it cost about 100 billion. Within government departments, they're saying, with 100 billion, and yes, you have gone and put all this equipment. I don't know how much, about 720 something billion for the cameras. You've put all these cameras in a bid to fight crime. You've invested, we used to look at the budgets when Kaihura was still in charge of the crime preventers, which he called human CCTVs because they are within the community. But crime doesn't seem to be ebbing, it doesn't seem to be going away. What new strategy gets the public to you? Because crime preventers were supposed to be part of the public, but they got co-opted into the police, the policing system. if people cross over completely from the community and the community doesn't have trust, they don't know, and all these villages around Kampala have groups where the local police station, the OC of that station is part of a WhatsApp group. They're supposed to share information, respond immediately. You don't seem to see that working. What will work?
Charles, yes, the CCTVs are in place. To me, I call them a white elephant. Back in the 60s, this country used to churn out detectives. We used to support Kenya with detectives. Today, you don't see that kind of capacity in place. The CCTVs, yes, they are in place. They will see me, Tom Malava, snatching a phone, but that is not enough. You saw what happened to Nagirinya's father. He went to the CCTV, he reported, but still the person did not act. So that means that the police has to do a lot to change the way their boys are doing their work. But still, who are these people you are changing? You have seen them strutting pistols. They are people, they are children of somebody. I'm a child of somebody, and you just don't push me around to go on chasing thieves on the street. They are children of ministers, NRM cadres, and that kind of thing. But these are the people that you are deploying to fight crime.
But that wouldn't speak for the entire police force, really.
Of course it wouldn't, but now the most affected city as far as Kampala is concerned is, as far as Uganda is concerned, is Kampala. Go on to all police stations or police posts in this town and see an old timer. Police work is about mentorship. It's just like journalism. You get mentored and you progress to the next level. Now, many of these guys have not been mentored, but they are supposed to handle and investigate a particular crime.
And they're commanding the would-be mentors. Yusuf, let me come to you. You have a more scary scenario in Jinja. It's been happening. Both the media and I think security hasn't paid as much attention to it. The other day, street kids, born and bred on the street, taking on a life of their own, controlling their own security. They killed a policeman who apparently, now we're learning, was at a police post alone. He goes into this den, follows up a thief, a snatcher, a phone snatcher or something, tries to bring him into the police post. The other kids follow him and slice him, hack him to death.
And they still run away.
And they still run away with their guy. Although they left the guy.
They also took the iron bus they had stolen.
Yes.
They took it from the place.
Yes.
What is interesting about that story, if I give you my large assessment of these issues, is that the death of the police officer in Jinja, hacked by thieves, doesn't sound really different from the death of Afande Chumina, who was also taken by thieves. You know, if we could have that analogy. They look the same, that you could be taken out at a higher level if you're apprehending big thieves. Because to be taken at a lower level, you're apprehending smaller thieves, which I find really fascinating. But this is the point I want to say. And I think this is the question we should be asking, taking some sort of a long durée of the security problem in this country. Why do criminal gangs keep coming up without stopping? But why do we have a continuity of these gangs? You deal with a section of these gangs, and then there's a re-emergency. There's some sort of seized, and there's emergency. Why do they keep coming up? And to answer this question is you have to understand that criminal gangs are a method of government. They are a ways in which governments manage. Across, by the way, it's not just about Uganda, but across governments. Other governments, more civilized governments, may commit crimes outside of their territory. In Ban republics, they control by committing crimes at home. I'd give you the example of 1960 when Milton Obote wanted to dissuade, to control Uganda anxiety about the Kabaka crisis. The government of Milton Obote at that time cultivated and put criminal gangs into the community that terrorized people. And then the people started demanding for security, which was a diversion from the crisis against the Kabaka. In the same period, in this country, we have so many demands. All right, so there are two ways I can think about it. I'm really being theoretical here as a scholar. I'm trying to connect the dots. There are two ways of thinking about it. One is we need to follow the money. All right, running after criminal gangs, there's a budget attached to it. You don't want to get rid of all the criminals, right? The story that we had about Kanu Kayanja's men that were taken out of this country is because there was justification for a budget. So you need to forward the money in the first instance. Who takes the budget when we are running after these criminal gangs? Last time I did ask a question. Who took the contract for the security cameras, right? The CCTVs. We need to know who actually took this contract because they already erected. And this is a multi-million, multi-billion enterprise. Who took it? Is it possible to argue that because there's a budget to it, you want these guys to be doing a job so that there's a justification? Then secondly, at the anxieties we have in this country about the economy, about the lifting of term limits, about the shrinking political space, there's also another way you can divert them when we start demanding for security against our items. Okay. So in that process, you have to have people who are committing crimes that you deal with them. Okay. All right. That's some kind of a theoretical stretch, but I think it's a way of putting these dots together.
Victor, let me come to you. You stretched this back to the 17th Commission on corruption within the police many years ago. It's gathered dust somewhere. But you have this cycle of... And then the question I want to put to you is from what Yusuf just said. When you unleash, if it's political, then you must have a means and the capacity to rein in. What has been happening in this country is, yes, theoretically you think, yes, you can, but after at the end of the day...
But Charles, also Sobi told us that he was working with government. So
yes, he is actually officially working with government now.
But Charles, you see, they are not interested in reining in the criminals. Let's start there. You saw this week there were a lot of arrests, there were a lot of supposed shops raided. If you look at the pictures of the phones that the police displayed, this time, just this week, the ones of mobile money, there is not a single phone that's worth being snatched from a car window. So when you say, and for me that's the question.
A lot of capabilities.
Yeah,
yes.
No, there was no single phone
of value
that you can say is a touch screen, however cheap a touch screen. How is it possible that those are I go to mobile money agents, I see the phones they use. How is it possible that these people only snatch the small ones? Now that's one. But secondly, let's talk about the impunity that we experience in this government. Last night I watched Afande Luko Isidire here on TV talking about the issue of students who were kidnapped, molested, beaten, and so on and so forth.
That was after their meeting yesterday.
Yes, and he was saying that that if students report, then they can look into their cases. What kind of police is only interested, something as publicized as the Makerere event has been, what kind of police is only interested if someone reports? It just tells you this police encourages impunity because that's how it operates. And I'm sorry, I should not be saying police, I should be saying security.
Security.
Yes. Because you raised the issue of the 17-day commission. I don't because the 17-day commission sort of laid the ground to introduce army men into the police, but that has not changed anything. And then let's also talk about the issue of unemployed population, and maybe sort of go back to the report released by the National Planning Authority. The issue was that we have to deal with the population growth rate. We have to invest in family planning because our population growth rate is so high. You cannot educate these, you cannot have the resources to educate these people, you cannot have the resources to employ them, you cannot have, it's not possible. Invest in slowing down the population because, and the president likes to talk about how it's good for Africa. But if you have that many people being born at the same time, you cannot
We'll have a discussion about that. I have a completely different view because I think we are just putting our money to the wrong priorities. This country would have enough money if you rated the population on the priorities, that actual priorities, you'd find the money. We suffer with traffic in this town every day because you see some people rushing with sirens. Those are 3 cars. Each of them is more than 200 million shillings with soldiers at the back. They're equipped, they are pimped with, some of them are 500, 600 million. No, just a moment. And they are running to do important things, and you wonder what important things they are going to arrest. If it's not to solve the traffic problem on the streets, if it's not to deal with crime, if it's not to deal with these things we're grappling with here, UP and Makerere University. Our time is out. We need to get out of here. Thank you very much. Dictor Asimwe from the East African. Thank you very much. Tom Malava from the Daily Monitor. And thank you very much, Yusuf Serunkuma, columnist with The Observer. Thank you very much to you, all our viewers, for joining us tonight and always. And thank you very much to the production crew that stay up late to deliver the show to you. From me, it's a good night and have a splendid week ahead. Good night.
Thank you.